Hello and welcome to Friday Live. I'm Amanda Farmer and we are going out to the Your Strata Property Facebook page and also out to LinkedIn. How y'all doing? How has your week in Strata been? I know for many of my friends, colleagues, clients, followers and supporters of our page here and Your Strata Property, I know that you are in lockdown, living in or working in as well the Greater Sydney area. So love and support going out to those of you in various parts of our country that are in lockdown. How are you going? How are you coping? I know many of you are in strata buildings and you are wondering how best to handle this situation, a situation in which we find ourselves once again looking for guidance, looking for some creative solutions to difficult problems. And I know that is what brought so many of you here on Tuesday evening. We had a Strata in Lockdown special live event here on the Facebook page, which I hosted on Tuesday evening. We covered lots and lots in that session. We ran for just over an hour. We talked about how the current New South Wales public health orders are impacting strata residents and managers. We talked in particular about what those orders don't necessarily cover and the gaps that we may prefer to see filled. We talked about the current New South Wales law on convening electronic meetings, some reminders there about the process, the practice and procedure to make sure we get our electronic meetings right, and what we should be doing if we are strata managers with already convened meetings in person. Should we be holding those meetings? We talked about whether a building, a committee, a strata manager has the right to know about residents who test positive for the virus or are in the building self-isolating. Many residents in Sydney in particular in that situation at the moment. How do we handle short-term holiday lets that might still be going on in regional areas where there is no lockdown and the restrictions are a little lighter than they are in other parts of Sydney? And we talked about how we can all round minimise the risk to health and safety for all residents. Now, I know many of you who are coming on in today, and I can see lots and lots of you there, once again will have joined me on Tuesday evening, and I know that that information, from what I've been hearing both on the night and since then, has been very helpful, very well received. If you did miss it or you just want to catch up again, the replay of that evening is just a little further down here on the Facebook page, or have a look in the video library on the Facebook page. Also on Tuesday and in this week's podcast, I let you know how you could get your hands on my Strata Lockdown Essential Guide that I have put together for you. It is a summary of those important items that were covered on Tuesday, including a lot of the links to helpful websites and other resources that you might want to head over and check out. It's an interactive PDF. Oh, don't want to knock the microphone out of the way there. I do have an earbud issue. I think my ears are too small. They are just my ear holes are too small for these new Apple AirPods. So we need to sort that out. If anybody has any suggestions for shrinking my AirPods or growing my ear holes, please let me know. Head over to yourstrataproperty.com.au/lockdown to grab your Strata Lockdown Essential Guide. I've also heard from many of you who've already checked that out, that it's very helpful. It contains that key information, nice and clear and concise, with click-through links to find out more. So that was Tuesday evening session. You are all back again for more. I have some hellos coming through thick and fast here. I'm going to head over to my comments and say hey to Sean McNamara. Great to see you. Haven't seen you for a while. We have another Sean. It is all the Seans. Sean is here. Sean O'Day's here twice in 1 week. Twice in 1 week, indeed, to the extent that I'm getting a little croaky here. So I have, sadly, Friday cup of tea here, just in case the coughing takes me over. Got my hot beverage there. Savia is here. Thank you, Amanda, for the lockdown guide. Very useful. Thank you, Savia. Oh my gosh, we have 3 Seans. Sean Birmingham is here as well. There are people other than Sean who follow this page. I love having all my Seans here. Tim is here. Great to see you, Tim, and happy Friday. Can you believe we are doing this once again? Our Friday Lives we started over 12 months ago during our first lockdown in Sydney, and we are back again. And I know that is what, you're not at the pub, you're all here enjoying Friday Live. Okay, I've got a discussion here among the Seans. Bruce is here, who is saying can't stay for long, but we'll watch the replay. Tuesday was excellent and got the guide. Awesome. Thank you, Bruce. And excellent. Ailey is here. Great to see you, Ailey from LinkedIn. Had the same AirPod Pro problem. Have you tried changing the size of the ear insert? I have. Am I right that there's only 2 sizes, the big size and the small size? Is there a medium? I don't know. I think I'm on the small size, but it didn't happen with my old ones, and I thought I was upgrading. We'll see how we go. Thank you for that tip, Ailey, and great to see you here again today. Alrighty, now I have a correction to make. One of our very loyal listeners, and indeed a member inside our membership community, Julie, you know who you are, has pointed out to me that on Tuesday I talked about Strata committee meetings and how it's important that we can convene these meetings and make quick decisions about changes to make in our community to protect our residents and our visitors. And I mentioned that it ain't that hard to convene a Strata committee meeting. You can do so on 72 hours notice. Now, Julie has pointed out to me that, Amanda, that is not actually what the New South Wales legislation says. It says 3 days. And when we apply our Interpretations Act principles to the definition of 3 days, then it is 3 clear days, which can be quite different to 72 hours. So I do make that apology and that correction, and thank you very much, Julie, for bringing that to our attention. Strata committee meetings in New South Wales can be convened on 3 days' notice. If you are in a building that is 100 lots or less, you can put that notice on the notice board. It doesn't have to be served on all owners like we do with our general meeting notices. If you're in a building with 101 lots or more, what we call a large strata scheme, you do need to be serving that notice on all owners. So you need to be adding some extra time to get that notice out to owners in large strata schemes. Okay, what are we going to cover today? A couple of things first up that are not necessarily pandemic related. The news came out yesterday that we have, through SCA New South Wales, a new professional standards scheme for our strata managers. I'm going to tell you a little bit about that and what that is all about. I'm also going to tell you about an exciting new water and cost-saving opportunity for apartment buildings in Sydney's eastern suburbs. We need some good news. We need some good news for those people who have been in the heart of the lockdown at the moment. I'll tell you about that. And then I am going to share with you some information about COVID-19 safety plans. This is something that we're starting to hear just within the last few days more about in New South Wales. And I understand that these plans have actually become mandatory for strata schemes in Victoria. So I'm wondering if we might be seeing that maybe on the horizon for New South Wales. So a good time to be talking about where you might be able to get your hands on a COVID-19 safety plan for your building. And I am definitely going to introduce you to our special guest today. We do have a special guest, as we like to do every now and then on our Friday Lives. I am welcoming in Jane Hearn of the Owners Corporation Network. So let's talk about today. I can see more of you coming on in, and Jenny is letting me know that she's experienced lockdown this week in WA. Yes, indeed. You were locked down there, Jenny. Are you still or are you out now? I haven't checked the latest news. And Jenny is also making a comment about council members, as we call them in WA, as opposed to Strata committee members, believing they can make decisions via email, or the Strata manager can make decisions as if they are the council. So yes, interesting question there, Jenny. Pamela is here. Hey, Pamela, how are you going? I know you joined us on Tuesday after an EGM and dropped me a note that you'd have to go back and rewatch because there was lots of good stuff happening in there. Zlata is here asking about 101 lots. I will come back to that one, Zlata. And Pamela's saying, great, awesome. Okay, I am going to share with you some info about our new professional standards scheme, unique, as I understand it, to SCA New South Wales and the first of its kind for the property services sector in Australia. Now, SCA and the New South Wales government have been working in partnership for some time. I think this has been in the works for a few years now, to, as they say, strengthen consumer protection and restore consumer confidence in strata managers. And just this week, yesterday, 1st of July, Kevin Andrews has announced the approval of a professional standards scheme, which actually commenced yesterday. Now, a professional standards scheme is a type of legal instrument, if you like, that actually has the effect of limiting the liability of professionals who participate in the scheme. Now, lawyers are part of a professional standards scheme. Accountants are part of a professional standards scheme. And if you're part of a scheme, it actually caps the amount of damages that a court can award to a client if they succeed in a claim against a scheme member. Now, the idea is that if you are getting this benefit of having your liability capped, and it's a cap on liability, not just damages, then you have to maintain certain standards as a professional. To be permitted to operate under this scheme, you are regarded as a professional the same way that lawyers and accountants are. So strata managers are now in this same category, and you have to demonstrate to the Professional Standard Council that you have a body. In the case of strata managers, it's SCA New South Wales, monitoring, enforcing, regulating, and improving the professional standards of members. Now, this scheme has been approved for strata managers in New South Wales for an initial period of 5 years, and that starts from yesterday. Strata manager members of SCA must adhere to a new code of ethics, which includes those professional standards that I've mentioned are monitored by the Professional Standards Council. So SCA sees this as a real commitment to consumers, that's you guys, those living in apartments, to ensure those high professional standards, those high standards of education and ethics. And it's all going hand in hand with the New South Wales government plan to restore confidence to the property sector, the construction sector, and restore professionalism. So there will be an increase in CPD requirements, continuing professional development requirements for strata managers and for their licensees in charge, to make sure that the industry remains up to date, educated, aware of their responsibilities. And in return for putting in all of that effort and increasing their professionalism, then strata managers who are members of the scheme will have their liability capped. And that cap, is $750,000. So they will never be liable for damages greater than $750,000 if they are members of the scheme. Now, to find out more, we have a link for you from Strata Community Association, New South Wales, and Rochelle is going to pop that there into the comments for you. I am also going to just press another button there to get some text on off the screen and head back over to see many more of you coming on in. Lots and lots. I was right in my email today. There is a lot of thirst for information, for guidance about our current situation, and I'm glad that you are all here. I will soon be welcoming in our special guest to assist in answering your questions. If you've come on in and you haven't yet dropped me a hello, I would love you to. It's always nice to see who is here joining us today. And if you have a specific question, do pop it in and I will head back over to those comments. So I've let you know about the SCA New South Wales Professional Standards Scheme. If you are a strata manager, you need to be aware of that, checking in with SCA about how that impacts you and what those changes may be. Excuse me. And there is a link there for you to find out more. Alrighty, now I have some exciting news about the opportunity to save some money in our buildings when it comes to the use of water. Now, our local councils in the eastern suburbs area of Sydney, specifically Randwick, Waverley and Wallara, have teamed up with Sydney Water to make it easy for apartment buildings in the east to save on water bills. Now, this is called the Water Fix Strata service, and apparently it is an end-to-end service to fix leaks and install water-efficient equipment inside apartments and common areas. Because as some of our strata managers, I'm sure, will know, many apartment buildings are quite literally pouring money down the drain by unintentionally wasting water, particularly through unknown leaks. Now, I am part of an Eastern Suburbs strata scheme, and this is certainly something that I would like to get my building involved in. The step to take at this stage is to register your building, and I believe if you're in the Randwick, Waverley, Wallara Council areas, you can register your building with Waterwise Apartments for a free water efficiency assessment. So we have a link here for you, which we will pop into the comments, so you can go and check that out and get your building registered to start saving money and wasting less water. Okay, we will shortly be heading over to welcome in our special guest, Jane Hearn. She is waiting in our virtual green room. Excited to spend all this time. Isn't it great that we can be here spending time with so many people perfectly compliant with our public health orders in New South Wales? On Tuesday, our Tuesday night broadcast, I mentioned our COVID-19 safety plans, or action plans, I also called them, and suggested that buildings start having a think about whether they need to put in place one of these safety plans. Now, I have heard that very recently these plans have become mandatory in Victoria for owners corporations there, and I understand SCA Vic has produced some information about that recently. Query whether this is about to happen in New South Wales. We seem to be a little slower on the uptake when it comes to our owners corporations in New South Wales, and our rules are a little less sophisticated in relation to planning for our strata schemes during the pandemic. However, that doesn't stop you, just because it's not mandatory, from getting a COVID-19 safety plan in place for your building. Now, if you are not sure where to start, I'm here to help you today. If you have been in this strata sector for a while in New South Wales, particularly if you are a manager or you're a strata lawyer, you have probably heard the name Wal Dobro. Wal is a valuer with over 35 years experience. He specialises in strata and compulsory acquisition matters. He's been a member of the Strata Industry Working Group for over 15 years, and that group is providing advice to the state government on issues through land and property information. He wrote the Common Property Memorandum that attempts to simplify the boundaries between lot and common property in New South Wales. He is the architect of the compensation regime under our strata termination provisions in our New South Wales legislation, and he recently reviewed all of the units of competency for the new Certificate 4 in Strata Community Management for all strata managers in Australia. Now, why am I mentioning the busy man that is Wal Dobro? Well, Wal and his sons, Chris, Jake, and Nick, have been preparing COVID safety plans, as I understand it, since last year. And just today, Wal shared with me a sample plan, removing all names and identifying features to protect the innocent. And I do think that it is a pretty comprehensive document that you do want to get involved in. The New South Wales government does have a suggested COVID plan for what they call the accommodation sector, which doesn't include our residential strata schemes. And having had a quick look at that, and I know Wal has done that too, it is pretty light on, with no real practical information on exactly how you might do things around your building to reduce risk. Wal's plans are much more comprehensive, easy to read, and pretty easy to implement. So I do have, once again, a helpful link for you. It is COVID-19 plans, that's the number 19 plans.com.au, to go and find out more about what Wal and his sons are doing when it comes to our COVID plans. They've done quite a few in Victoria and now reaching out to New South Wales. So check them out. Come back and let me know what you think as well, but I can't see that it is a bad thing at all, even if it is not yet the law in New South Wales to have a COVID-19 safety plan in place. We will also pop the link to the New South Wales government's broader outline of COVID safety plans for the accommodation industry. So you might be able to compare the detail that Wal provides with what the New South Wales government has outlined. Alrighty, I am now going to welcome in our very special guest for today, and she is indeed Jane Hearn. Jane is a lawyer with many years of experience in international human rights law and in legal policy across various areas of public law. She hails from London, but she considers herself now a Sydney-sider. Her law degree is from UNSW. She started in social welfare and community development and then moved into law. That took her to the Commonwealth Attorney General's Department and Federal Parliament. In 2015, Jane worked with a former Solicitor General of Australia to implement a national executive agreement on the regulation of the legal profession. Her move into Strata happened around about that same time, and she tells me it has been a real eye-opener. Jane is the former chair and current spokeswoman for the Owners Corporation Network on short-term letting and COVID-19 issues. Jane was a font of good information during our session on Tuesday evening, posting about her own experiences in the comments. So I have invited Jane to join us here today in person, or as in person as we can be right now. Welcome, Jane Hearn.
Hello, Amanda. Thank you.
Pleasure to have you here with us today, Jane, and thank you for making the time. Am I able to ask you, if you don't mind, where you are? And I think I might have given away that you're in Strata. A little bit about your community.
So I'm in Waverton, which is sort of the lower North Shore, and the scheme that I live in is one of three in a community development. So it's a stage development. 3 schemes spread across a few acres of land, and we have a community association which is responsible for all those recreation facilities, which I'm sure we'll sort of talk about later. So I think when this was built about 20 years ago, it was considered high rise because it's 10 stories. But around here, particularly Crow's Nest, St Leonard's, and then going into North Sydney and across the bridge, of course, if you describe what I live in as high rise now, people will just laugh at you. Yes.
But so lots of community.
Sorry,
yep,
it's quite a stable community, but like most, it's about 60-40 owner occupiers and tenants. And, we are fortunate that we've got a lot of open land around us.
Yep. And lots of, I think I do know your community, lots of community facilities, gym, pool, tennis courts maybe.
3 pools, yes, 3 pools, an indoor gym and tennis courts, and a heritage building which has the estate office and a function room and a meeting room in it. So it's got quite elaborate shared facilities.
And I know from your posts on Tuesday night, you were giving us some examples of what your community was doing to keep residents safe. And I do want to get into that. But first of all, I've said that you are a former chair and now the spokeswoman for the Owners Corporation Network, which is an excellent owner advocate group here, particularly strong in New South Wales. What drove you, I imagine it might have been some years ago, to get involved with the OCN?
Yeah, so as I said, my background is actually, before I went into law, was in social welfare and community development. So, I guess my thinking is to look for an organisation that was going to be representative of people that live in this environment. And I found OCN, and then it was shortly, which I found very useful, and then it was shortly after that that we also had the Airbnb issue kind of erupted. And with my background in legal policy, I was involved in developing the submissions for each scheme in the CA so that we submitted as one entire estate. And then my involvement sort of continued from there because, as you know, the Airbnb issue, the short-term letting issue has just really dragged on for several years. And then it kind of manifested into some other things, and then COVID hit us. And this gap in communication and thinking about the strata environment was so apparent that OCN, you will recall because you were involved yourself, involved in organising meetings with government to try and get the message across to them.
Yes, and it seems to be a message that still hasn't been received as clearly as we would have hoped, and I am going to ask you about that soon. But I have heard from the OCN executive officer, Karen Stiles, who is just as tireless as you are, I know, Jane, that the OCN is receiving lots and lots of questions from residents from Greater Sydney in lockdown areas about what they should be doing. And some of those questions we addressed on Tuesday, and I'm seeing more of them come through in our comments now. We will get to those. But one that caught my attention, which we didn't address on Tuesday, was about renovation work still going on in buildings during a lockdown, and residents being so impacted by noise, which is difficult at the best of times. But when you can't escape to go to the office or to go to the shops or to hang out at your friend's house, it is really very intrusive. And I can see Kevin's comment here saying that he was interested in particular today in that topic with many residents working from home. So in your community, is this something that is going on? I know it is in my community in Sydney. And do you have any suggestions, tips from the practical side on the ground, what residents, owners could be doing about this?
So we don't have any going on at the moment in the building that I'm in, or certainly not ones that are high impact, but we did last year, and there were various suggestions. In that case, because it had already been approved and because it was imminent and the people couldn't actually move in at all until it was done, and the people living immediately around them said, look, it should just go ahead. Everybody accepted it and it went ahead. And they did their best to be communicative with all the neighbours, to moderate the hours. So they were considerate. And so when you've got that kind of situation, you can sometimes manage your way through it. I think it's very, very difficult when you don't have that kind of consideration coming into play. If it hasn't already been approved, then I think, a strata committee, probably should not be approving it until there's a bit more certainty about when the lockdown is going to finish, or when that future plan, when the renovation's actually going to take place. So you could approve it and then enter into a negotiation about exactly when and the timing. The difficulty, of course, is that we don't exactly know when we might be thrust into this situation again. So there isn't actually a hard and fast kind of answer. If in some circumstances people are going to be happy to put off, it might be an installation of a kitchen, to put it off for a week or 2 weeks. But if somebody's already halfway through a plumbing renovation and they can't live in the property, they really need to be able to get it done. So it's not there's no perfect answer. It's like everything in strata. There has to be some give and take, some consideration, one hopes, and a bit of management. I do think that some schemes have got bylaws which have put some caps on measures around the hours. So, for example, it can't be done after 5 o'clock in the evening and not on the weekend. And they've relied on those bylaws, even though we know that Minister Stokes issued an order that said that construction could go on 7 days a week. And I think if you look at that very closely, you can nuance that a bit too. That doesn't mean that people, I think, have got the right to completely override your bylaws. You really need to look at it, look at the specifics, and ask your Strata lawyer.
Yes, indeed. But I can tell you today, Jane, and everybody who is watching and interested in this question, you're right. If the work has been approved by the owners corporation, if it's work impacting the common property, we know that that does require approval, whether that's a meeting resolution or a bylaw for major work. If that's all been approved, then there is nothing in our public health order that prevents or requires that construction work not to go ahead. Construction work is exempt from the shutdown under our public health orders. But absolutely, this has happened in my building recently, where an owner who had a bylaw approved at a meeting a few weeks ago has said, okay, well, contract was signed 2 weeks ago and we're ready to go ahead next week. I'm just going to put notices up in the lift, let everyone know I'm going ahead. And this is major work, ripping out a bathroom. We're going to have the jackhammering noise going on. And we've said to that owner, first of all, on compassionate grounds, could you please consider starting your work perhaps a week later, in the hope that the Sydney lockdown will be finished by the end of next week? Fingers crossed. And in any event, if you are starting during this period, we do ask that your contractors provide a COVID safety plan. Now, these are contractors who are going to be coming in and out of the building. These are visitors to the building. There's going to be more people on site. And these contractors should be well aware of the need to provide a COVID safety plan. And even that request, if you haven't made it before, or if it comes as a surprise to your owner wanting to do the work, may in itself cause a bit of delay, which may give you some breathing space to be without this noisy work going on for the next week. I did dig up the New South Wales government link to their webpage, where they talk about construction and trades needing to provide COVID safety plans. So we'll pop that here in the comments. So some committee members might want to put their hands on that and give that to owners who are wanting to do work and say, hey, make sure your contractors have one of these and will comply. The other thing that just occurs to me now, Jane, is that if the owner who's doing the work is not resident in the building, they're living somewhere else, they've been renting, they want to move in because they bought a few months ago. As I read the public health orders, they actually, if they're in Greater Sydney lockdown, cannot come in to the property to check on the work, to supervise contractors, because they will then be leaving their home. It is not a reasonable excuse, as I recall looking at that list, to go and check on your construction work that might be happening at your investment property or at your proposed future residence. So that in itself may be a reason why owners may be encouraged to delay the commencement of their work, reminding them, hey, your contractors can be here, but you can't.
That's interesting. I hadn't thought about that, but you're quite right. It's not explicit in the reasonable excuse, which I believe is intended to be exhaustive.
Yes.
And I'm just non-exhaustive.
Yeah, I'm just seeing, I've just lost it. There's so many comments here. Grant saying, Amanda, your suggestions here is exactly what I did for a commenced renovation last year in lockdown. Yes, I do think approaching owners and saying, look, we know this is approved. We know that construction work is not exempt. So it is legal, technically legal for you to continue, but we're all here. We're all working from home. This is going to be 5 days straight of jackhammering. Please, can we delay this for a week?
I think at the moment as well, I mean, it's a nightmare for people who've got to do a lot of meetings, through Zoom, and I've done them myself with banging on the wall, and in fact, I even had a helicopter land at one point. But also children are at home, so the stress levels are really up, and I do think that consideration of other people is really mean, that's actually the byword for this whole sort of scenario. We really have to think as community-minded as we can be. Notwithstanding, we understand and it's difficult, but there are some things that will have to go ahead, but where it's possible to delay it, delay it. Let's hope that we're out of lockdown, in another week. We're uncertain at the moment how long this is going to go. Last year, we were in lockdown for a much longer period of time, and also there was a lot of anxiety about how bad it was going to be as people saw the numbers rise really rapidly overseas. So I think we've kind of all got a bit more experience with this now. And we know that, we're hoping that in a week or so we are going to be out of lockdown. And there are a lot of tradespeople. I was sort of hoping that actually there's a lot of people in the trades who are off because their kids are off, so they're not actually doing as much work at the moment. I don't know whether that's fantasy or whether that's actually reflected out there in the real world, but it did strike me that a lot of these people would in fact be off at the moment because of school holidays.
Yeah, possibly. I do know that at the best of times, trying to record live video or podcast while this what I now call the sounds of Strata going on in the background can be difficult. So yes, while we're all doing our online activities, unhelpful to have our jackhammering going on. Now I know, Jane, with your community, which is a reasonably complex community association set up with lots of shared facilities, you were letting us know on Tuesday some of the things that your community had done, specifically around QR codes and the recreational facilities, which I thought were really great tips. Did you want to share some of that with our viewers here today?
I think this is a really interesting development, and I really didn't know about it until actually it was communicated from the CA. But I think some of the other people that came online on Tuesday had said they'd done the same thing. And it's this: they're using their ABN number to register for a QR code. And they're using the QR code so that people have to check in to our estate office, which is, as I said, is in a separate building. And that, of course, is a workplace. So we have to be masked and use the QR code when going into the building. And they've also done that with the recreation, which is another separate building, which has the gym and the pool in it. So I thought that was quite a clever and nifty way of sort of moving towards a better organised way of dealing with the traffic coming in and out. The RCA has also said no outside visitors into the gym and pool, which I think people have largely accepted because that people are not expecting to be having visitors. I mean, basically we should be at home, and there are reasons for going and visiting people, care and so forth. But I think that's been well accepted. And so that means also that tradespeople coming on to the estate would be using the QR code to sort of log in, as it were, at the estate office. Again, I think that's a very useful step forward and quite a clever way of getting round. Last year we were just so frustrated by we're not businesses, and we are residential, but we've got non-residential elements. I'm not using that term technically, I just mean in a general sense. And it was how to sort of straddle instead of falling through the cracks all the time. So that's quite a nifty development. I know others have done it as well.
Yes, and it was great when we started talking about that on Tuesday evening, that I put it out there as something that I had heard about buildings obtaining these QR codes through Services New South Wales. As you say, Jane, if you have an ABN, that's an ABN for your owner's corporation, then you can fairly easily obtain one online. And I questioned, is anybody doing this? I didn't see in the drop-down list that there was an option for strata schemes, and technically they are residential premises, so they're not covered, but plenty of building managers and yourself, and I can see Brian here just letting us know that he's done that. I have said, absolutely, we've done it, and we do ask visitors, to the extent we have a few visitors, we have trades. I love what you're
Yes.
saying, Jane, about your recreational facilities and just being able to keep track if we need to about who's coming and going, and to be alerted as quickly as possible if we do need to be alerted by Services New South Wales. I can't see a downside to that. So, Brian, I'm just having a go for it.
Can I just add something? Sorry to interrupt you. I was speaking with somebody who's in a very large high-rise down in the CBD, and they, in terms of managing their pool, they had wanted to close it. And whilst the majority of people wanted to close it, there were certain people with a strong opinion that it shouldn't be done, and we'll get to recreation facilities. But they also didn't want to book in. So the building manager was in a very difficult situation because, you know, their gym, for example, is very small. So they had wanted to try and just put in some way of moderating it so that it didn't get overcrowded. And also we know now that we've got more of a problem with airborne transmission. So the QR code is a kind of neutral way of, you know, you can't, I mean, you know, people are still probably going to enter without using it, but the bulk of people will use it. And it was a way of just neutralising what was probably turning into some conflict. So it's quite helpful in that sense. And of course, it helps the contact tracers.
Absolutely. And gives you that confidence. And we talked a little bit about this offline, Jane. A lot of the anxiety comes from the not knowing, what if there's a positive case, the imagining that, you know, I'm in the Elan Apartments, perhaps in King's Cross, and there must be hundreds of people now in the building who have the virus. And if you're checking in to a building, then you can have the confidence that you'll be notified if you are indeed if you've been let me say that again, if this is an exposure site or you have been a close contact, and just lower those anxiety levels.
I should say that we're not using it for residents on the regular buildings, because I think that would be probably a step too far, and that would be, people would not accept that. And in Victoria, where they have been a step ahead of us in terms of trying to tailor public health orders, and obviously their plans to Strata as well, I think that some of the residents did find that quite objectionable. So, I mean, you can do it for visitors, do it for the recreation facilities, but I wouldn't do it for the front of a building when it's residents coming in and out.
Yep, I like that. That sounds sensible. I'm just going to show Jacqueline's comment here on the screen, which I love and is incredibly astute. The language that Jane uses about the strata she lives in is the starting point for the respect that's evident in the whole approach to sharing facilities and living space, active consideration and acknowledgement of community rather than individual needs. Thank you very much, Jacqueline, for pointing that out so eloquently. And I do, you know, Rena and I often say it on the podcast, it's wonderful to hear about things working in Strata and the good news stories and the happy or reasonably happy residents, particularly during difficult times. So hats off to you, Jane, for achieving that in your community, and thank you for sharing that here.
There is a toolkit online with lots of posters, and, you know, from the Department of Health, that, you know, you can find one that's suitable for you, you know, which will do things like encourage people to wear masks and the distancing on the mat in the lifts. So, you know, there's a lot of resources on the Department of Health site that you can use.
Yes, and that is absolutely one of the links that I have put in my Strata Lockdown Essential Guide, and that's the URL that you're seeing on your screen there. We've got the link to the New South Wales Health page with the posters there. Use those as appropriate, I say in the guide. You shouldn't be selecting the poster, for example, that says mandatory mask wearing. And we can get into that, but my reading of the public health orders is that our strata common areas are places of residence, and places of residence are exempt from the mandatory mask wearing in New South Wales. So just be careful about that, but there's lots of other very helpful posters. The other link that is in the lockdown guide is the link to get your own QR code. So the New South Wales Services New South Wales link there to get your own QR code if you're not sure where to go for that one. Now, we've talked about recreational facilities a little bit, Jane, and no doubt this is a question that's coming up with OCN as well. I'm seeing it here on the page. We had it on Tuesday night. From my perspective, we do not, in our public health orders, unlike in Victoria, have a directive to close our gyms and our pools in our strata schemes. There is a directive about public pools. There are restrictions on gyms in terms of limited numbers of people, which doesn't really apply to our small gyms in our strata schemes. But I said on Tuesday that it's really a matter for the community, how they manage those spaces and whether they're comfortable or think it is an acceptable risk to take to keep those spaces open with increased cleaning schedules, supervision, QR codes. What are your thoughts there?
I think technically you're right, but I mean, last year, I think building managers and strata managers, I hope will agree with this, that 99% of schemes that had pools actually closed them, and gyms. And then, for some of them, there was pushback. And so they did actually reopen. And then I think they got further advice to say kind of close them because they had sort of broader sort of duty of care obligations. And this is the problem with this lack of clarity, that Victoria has had absolutely no problem being explicit about swimming pools and gyms and apartment complexes. And then they have a very clear sort of staging of their lockdown and their restrictions as well. So stage 3 and stage 4, they also put out guidance that was explicit for both commercial and residential buildings that contain these kinds of facilities. So that's why I believe our scheme this year has not closed the pool. And there's a certain amount of holding one's breath, if that's not a bad choice of words, that in fact we don't have a spreading event in the facilities. So this is a really important reason for getting New South Wales over the line in understanding that actually many of these schemes, particularly the really big ones, I mean, there are schemes that, 800, I know one of the members of OCN is an 800 lot scheme, 19 lifts, 3 pools, indoor gym. We're not talking always about the 3-story walk-up. And a lot of these facilities are indoors. In our situation, our facilities are in separate buildings because it's a redeveloped site. It was an industrial site that's been redeveloped. Whereas in most buildings, those facilities are actually in the building where the residents are, and there's a lot of traffic in and out. So that leaves us with, I think, your approach, which was go back to the community if you've got doubt or there's going to be differences of opinion.
Yes, and there will always be differences of opinion. And ultimately, as I've been saying for the last over 12 months, it's about making the least worst decision and the one that is best going to protect those in our community. If you don't have a building manager, if you're not able to afford an increased monitoring and cleaning, and you are just not able to make sure those areas are safe, then closing them may well be the least worst decision. I do just want to address a question that I'm seeing pop up in the comments from Grant asking about contractors on site within strata complexes. I think, Grant, this was asked in the context of mask wearing, and it's a very good question. My understanding is because the contractor is at a workplace, that's their workplace, not their place of residence, then they should be wearing masks when they are working in the building. So good question there. If anybody disagrees with me, happy to hear. Now, you mentioned there, Jane, the difference between the Victorian approach, that clarity in their public health orders about the regulation of their owners' corporations. I've said earlier that mandatory COVID safe plans are being introduced in Victoria for owners' corporations, not so here. That doesn't mean you shouldn't be looking into getting one. At the risk of, at this time on a Friday afternoon, getting a bit political and maybe hot under the collar, what's going on with New South Wales government? Why are we being forgotten? I mean, OCN does and has done for so many years such great work getting a seat at the table, putting these issues in front of government. It's not a matter, I don't think, of us not getting our voice out there. Why are we being
it's not
ignored?
rocket science. Sorry, I spoke over you. Sorry. Yeah, I mean, I think if you recall last year, we worked very hard to actually get a sort of cross stakeholder meeting, with fair trading, and in fact, I think we couldn't even get somebody from health into the meeting. It took quite an effort to get that to happen, and I thought that there was a lot of really sensible explanation and suggestions. And in fact, we did sort of break down a few barriers because the Minister's office realised fundamentally, I mean, there is an issue about legality and risk management, but there's also an issue about communication. So if they're not communicating to us really what they think the risk management measures should be, and you've got a huge variety of built environment, you've got all these different opinions, then you in fact are increasing the risk that something's going to go wrong. So we did hope that maybe some of the messages got through. They are more explicit about short-term rental accommodation, which is that may well have come from the Airbnb lobby, because they want to know that they can continue and how many people they can have. It just doesn't make sense. It was only 2 days ago that Toronto, and I am thinking Sydney here, and I guess we've got to remember we are statewide and our city councils can't do this. But Toronto has put out a very explicit set of instructions for people who manage these kinds of complexes, because Toronto and Sydney are very similar in that regard, and Victoria has no problem about it. Previously, Queensland. So I think it's this what Karen calls, the government is strata blind. It can't, and it's often strata deaf, I'm afraid. It's not about asking for special treatment. It's about clarity, so people have a degree of certainty and comfort and knowledge that their environment is being managed. That's kind of all it is. Why they think it's not appropriate, I'm not even sure they've thought about it enough to say they've considered all the factors and their policy decision is that it is not warranted based on the evidence of COVID-19, because I don't believe they could come to that as a rational, coherent or logical conclusion. And I've worked a lot around in, senior levels of government where, they have to work through the factors and look at all the unintended consequences. And they cannot say that we haven't raised it. And it's building managers, strata lawyers, strata managers, everybody across the sector's raised it. So they're being a bit stubborn. But in fairness to them, I want to say that for health, I don't know what the staffing and resourcing of health is like because I've not had any interaction with them in the past. But they have a lot of demands on their time. And it may just be that this is just too much to think about. It's too difficult to think about. They don't have enough experience in the field, and they don't have the sort of policy capacity to get their head around it. And we don't have a strata voice at the table. That's what came out really clearly last year, that when the agencies are meeting in emergency to talk about what needs to be done, we don't have a person from fair trading or somebody with a specialist strata knowledge at that table saying, these are the things we need to cover off for the big apartment complexes. They could do it across the whole sector, but they don't even look at the big apartment complexes. So that's why, we've continued with this advocacy for an independent strata commissioner, a commissioner of strata living being the operative word, so that there is somebody who over time has a cross-portfolio responsibility to be able to say what the impacts are on strata. I don't think it's that hard, actually.
And am I right that let me get this right, the property services expert panel of which OCN is a part?
Is not a part.
Is not a part.
No.
That was where Kevin Andrews announced he would appoint the Property Services Commissioner.
Mm,
SCA supports that. OCN is not on that panel, so there's no
mm,
consumer representative there,
that's right.
and is not truly then a commissioner for strata living.
Oh no, it's got nothing to do with strata living. I mean,
Yeah.
people will say it because it's a kind of political response, but no, they're not strata. They're not a commissioner for strata living. And also, I think when we, as a sector, kind of evolve the sort of concept a bit more, there's an interest from the community in having a commissioner for strata living that will have not only a policy responsibility, but as that name commissioner suggests, that they would have some powers. And there's an interest in looking at how NCAP functions and how efficient and effective that is in meeting the needs. Whether there needs to be a bit more a fresh look at the institutional design of how the various issues that come up in strata are actually managed. What's the appropriate response? We have mediators. NCAT doesn't have a special strata list. So you may get someone who's very experienced, but you may not. And there's been a trend through all the administrative tribunals to start trying to kind of collapse them. And that has not produced a kind of quality result. So, there are a number of things playing into the idea that developing a model of a commissioner for strata living, that is a kind of an idea, its time has come. It wouldn't be the same as the one that was around in the 90s. Tribunals were seen as an evolution in justice rather than having a single commissioner make decisions. The whole administrative tribunal system has evolved to provide a quicker, cheaper, faster justice for people on what are a lot of transactions, and you don't want everything going into the court system. But there's so much dissatisfaction or sense of there's inconsistency, so much inconsistency in NCAT, and that's certainly the perception, and it's something that should be studied. I mean, I just think it's something the Law Reform Commission should be looking at, and the Commissioner for Strata Living, is part of that. So that's my 2 cents worth. Coming from a legal and legal policy background, you've got to design. They have to invest. We've put in so much money into residential construction in New South Wales. All our eggs are in this basket in terms of housing people and productivity and future economic growth. I think that it's worth investing in some of the quality and support and information. We just don't have a commensurate investment on the other side of the ledger yet.
Yes, well, here, I wholeheartedly support that, Jane. And I know we have mostly owners and strata managers tuning in here, and I am sure they support that as well. I'm seeing a comment here from Megan Chatterton of City of Sydney Council saying, nice one, gals. So there's a thumbs up there. It is a hard area to get involved in from any angle, whether you're a politician, whether you're a lawyer, whether you're a strata manager, a resident owner who, like you, had their eyes opened when they first entered strata. So I understand why it does get put into the too hard basket. But definitely a commissioner for strata living, I think, would be a good start to have that single point that we could start solving some of these problems. There are so many comments here that I haven't got to in the chat, and lots of hellos. I'm seeing some new names here that I haven't seen online for a while. I'll come back around and give you some answers to some of those questions we didn't get to, and also say hello. But for now, I am going to let you all head off into your quiet, perhaps Friday evenings if you are in Sydney and in lockdown, cozied up. And those of you who have children who are on school holidays, my sympathies to you if you're also in lockdown, because it's that time of the week when things get a little bit wild with kids who haven't been allowed out. So have a Friday glass of wine, whatever it is you like to do to relax. But thank you, all of you, once again, for coming out to learn, to access this information that I believe is going to help you and your communities to more safely, more smoothly navigate as best you can your way through these difficult times. Thank you very much, Jane Hearn, a
You're
spokeswoman
welcome.
from OCN.
You're welcome.
And head out and enjoy that lovely community that you have as best you can, Jane, as Jacqueline pointed out. And thank you for sharing the good ways that you are dealing with this situation.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good night. See you later.
Bye.